Now, there are three key metrics that ultimately drive the economy. The first one is unemployment. And the goal that the government has and the Fed has is to keep unemployment under 6%. And you can see here that going all the way back uh, to basically 2015 or 2015, we've been under that 6% unemployment rate, other than for a brief spurt during COVID when nobody could work. All in all, the economy has actually been held pretty good since the Great Recession, because this is what we saw back during the Great Recession, where we saw unemployment rates get up near 10%. Now, if we look at what's happening monthly, you can see that there's been this sort of trend of going from the mid threes to now where we're near the mid fours. So we've seen the job market cooling down, and obviously the Federal Reserve is keeping an eye on that. And if we look at how that plays out on a national basis, what you see here, so we're in at 4.3% unemployment in the state of Washington, which is right below the 4.4%, which is the national average. We dropped down into Oregon, and they're actually at 4.8, and California, Nevada is around 5 to 5.3% unemployment. So all in all, the employment situation in Washington bodes well for us. Now, the second key metric that the Fed and the government look at is what we call GDP, or gross domestic product. Now, the goal here is to have GDP growth of at least 2%. 2% is considered strong, healthy growth for our country. Anything above that, and basically it's champagne and cocaine, it's like, woo, party. And of course, what we know is negative growth is not a good thing. And in fact, by definition, any two consecutive quarters of negative growth is what we would call a recession. In fact, that is the definition of a recession. So you can see we had a recession back at the beginning of 2020. And of course, we know why, and that was COVID. Interestingly, the first two quarters of 2022, we saw negative GDP growth, and the government at the time said, well, that's not really a recession. I'm like, okay, that's your definition, so I find it hard. But we saw things slow down in the first half of 2022 when it came to gross domestic product. If we look at last year, honestly, you see that we had negative growth in the first quarter through the third quarter. Basically, the economy's on fire. Unfortunately, those numbers aren't necessarily really telling. And the reason being is that the numbers are artificial based on the way industry and importers and exporters have responded to the tariffs that have been levied. So we're just going to need to wait a little longer, I believe, to see, okay, what's actually happening with GDP in a real sense. Now, the third key metric is what we call inflation, and we measure that through the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. Now, the blue line here represents CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, and the gold line is what we call core CPI. Now, the difference between those two is in core, we strip out energy and food. And the reason for that is that typically energy and food tend to be volatile. If there's a hurricane in the Gulf and they have to close down some refineries in Louisiana, guess what? We see price of gas spike. If there's a flood in the San Joaquin Valley in California, boom, all of a sudden strawberries and lettuce are more expensive, right? So they strip that out to try and get a better sense of it. And you can see that we've done a fairly good job over the years of maintaining that low inflation rate. We saw it peak back in 06, 07, which of course was right before the market crashed in 08, and you saw what happened there to inflation. Now, if you go fast forward to 2020, of course, we went into COVID, and then we came roaring back. And that was why the Federal Reserve raised the rates on the federal funds rate from basically 0 to 5.25 to 5.5 in less than a year. And it was to get a handle on that massive growth of inflation. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe and join us as we continue to build careers worth having, businesses worth owning, and lives worth living.